This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Doc, I will never wear Ohio State garb, but I will always check out The Athletic, one of our fine partners at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. And The Athletic and The Athletic Detroit, all of the Athletic local sites are premium coverage. And The Athletic Detroit premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. And listeners of this week's episode of Tiger Talk with Chirco and Company can get 30% off the first year of an annual subscription to The Athletic by visiting theathletic.com/DSP. And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tiger Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Chirco, alongside my usual sidekick and broadcast partner in fun. That is Doc from Doc and Jack, John Charles Macaroon. John, how are you doing, man?
Sitting here, recording the podcast, feeling good. The Detroit Tigers are playing winning baseball, destroying teams that are obviously worse than them. Sitting here 36-37, about to embark on an interleague series versus the Reds, have a chance to get to 500 and maybe above. Lots of good things to talk about with the Detroit Tigers, and we got a great guest on this week's podcast. Looking forward to the conversation. Who's the guest this week that's going to be here joining us shortly?
Dr. Tommy John III, actually. And now, so he's the son of who? Tommy John himself, who won 288 games in his 26-year big league career. So think about that. And he pitched 14 seasons after undergoing the then experimental Tommy John procedure in 1974 to repair a torn ulnar collateral ligament in his elbow. So think about that. It was experimental back then, and now it's commonplace, way too commonplace in youth athletes. Dr. Tommy John will be along for the ride to discuss that very note and some other topics regarding his dad and his own profession on this week's episode of Tigers Talk.
Yeah, Dr. Tommy John wrote a book, and he is really focused in on the youth that are playing baseball in terms of travel sports. There has been a significant rise in the frequency and the number of Tommy John surgeries on kids, and he's championing a position that maybe some people are not happy with, and so I'm looking forward to the conversation. He actually reached out to us and said, look, this is a cause I'm deeply passionate about. I want to address it, and we definitely are happy to give him that platform. But before that, we've got to talk about the Detroit Tigers, man. A great weekend series. Obviously, your brother probably was a little bit disappointed that the Detroit Tigers swept the Chicago White Sox, and it's a situation in which Detroit went into Chicago, and the Tigers have played very well on the road versus the White Sox, and they went in and handled their business. Shane Greene was pretty much for the week really efficient, and the performance that many wanted to see when Jimenez was given the chance to close it out on Sunday, it was amazing. He went in there and was just balling, throwing flames, and he got guys out pretty quickly. He looked like the closer in waiting, and it was nice to see. It was really nice to see Shane Greene go in there and handle his business. I think he went 4 games in a row with a save. He had a great opportunity to showcase his stuff, didn't cause too much damage, and we'll talk about it probably after the Tommy John interview. The biggest story probably coming from the weekend is the Tigers might be seriously considering a 6-man rotation, because how do you take out Blaine Hardy? He's been doing some fun things, and he's a left-handed pitcher along with Boyd that has been really effective. So over the weekend, a lot of good things to talk about. When you win a bunch of games in a row, when you have a winning streak, people tend to notice, and people are noticing, the Tigers aren't as bad as we thought they were.
So Shane Greene, you mentioned him, how great he was, how effective he was last week. 4 saves in 4 consecutive days. The first Tigers closer to do that since Todd Jones. The roller coaster himself did it back when he was in a Tigers uni. So Shane Greene was excellent last week. Joe Jimenez has been excellent definitely for a long while now as a setup man, and you could say Jimenez has the best stuff. Shane Greene has ultra-effective stuff at times as well that he features, but the best overall stuff, velocity on the fastball, and sick, nasty strikeout stuff is probably belonging to Joe Jimenez in the Tigers bullpen currently. Both could be tradable assets. Joe Jimenez isn't going anywhere right now, though. I believe he's 23 only. He better not be going anywhere, and the Tigers would expect a large haul in return for Joe Jimenez's services. So let's not even go down that path. He's not going anywhere, Joe Jimenez, at this point. Now, or Jimenez. Now, Shane Greene, will be dealt, more than likely. And as he pitches more and more effectively, closes more and more games, and he's shown the aptitude or the proneness to get these saves now conducted and in consecutive days. Well, all of that, taking all of that into account, it all amounts to the fact that Shane Greene has increased his trade value immensely over the course of the last week. And you could see him dealt, anytime soon. The Royals closer, Kelvin Herrera, great closer this year of years past, has been dealt already to the Washington Nationals, a team that has needed bullpen help for a long time. So maybe a team like the Nats deals for Shane Greene as well. And the haul should be great for him as long as he pitches better and better as time goes on. And I think Greene's trade value right now has increased immensely over the course of the last week. So you could see him, and I believe you will see him dealt before that July 31 non-waiver trade deadline this year.
I have to get your thoughts on it because the fans are a little bit divided regarding how to perceive the Detroit Tigers. People are like, look, why is everybody puffing up the Detroit Tigers? 70% of their wins have been against teams that have been garbage. So it's not really an indication as to how good the Tigers are. And then you got the other side going, look, it's not the Tigers' fault that the rest of Major League Baseball, the AL Central, has been garbage. How much credit can you legitimately give the Detroit Tigers for being only one game under 500 at this point in time in the season?
I say it more like this. How sad is it in Detroit pro sports that we are so happy and excited about a 500 ball club? What does that say about the rest of the pro sports teams in Detroit right now? Tigers have the best shot at winning besides for the Lions. The Lions have the best shot currently, but the thing is the Tigers are right behind the Lions. How sad is that to say as a Detroit pro sports fan that the Tigers have one of the best odds of the 4 pro sports teams in the city of Detroit? Tigers are right there behind the Lions for best odds to win right now. So do you have to give them credit? Yes. Do I give them credit? I will myself. But, how much credit can you give them? It goes back to that when you're playing those weak opponents a lot of times throughout the season thus far in the American League Central Division. And it's full of teams that are crappy, are crummy, that have underachieved, like the Twins and Indians up to this point in the season. Teams that are just, darn bad. In the White Sox and the Royals have already dealt Kelvin Herrera, as I noted. The White Sox will be dealing guys, too, if they can get prospects to build up their club for the future. So the White Sox should start performing, should start showing some results. The Royals are a ways away. They are a long ways away from being relevant once again. They have to revamp their farm system. They will be bad for the long-term future for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So honestly, their rebuilding process is much more, or going to be much more prolonged than even the Tigers rebuild, which has it been expedited by getting Casey Mize at the top of the draft in this year's amateur draft? Maybe it has. And you've seen now where the Tigers farm system is about middle of the way in terms of the 30 Major League Baseball clubs, hovering towards that 20 spot. So maybe not quite halfway in Major League Baseball currently, but they're hovering, trending upward. And the thing is, you want to see them continue to trend upward. And with Miguel Cabrera now being gone for the remainder of the season, might be a blessing in disguise for the Tigers and their long-term rebuilding hopes. As with him being out the rest of the season, they might lose more games, a lot more games, and trend downward. Right now, they haven't shown that thus far, the ability or the start of trending downward, but I think you will see that as the season does progress, where they start to trend downward and end up being a 4th place team. I don't think the Royals will jump them, but can the White Sox still, even after getting swept by the Tigers at home this past weekend? Yes. And that's why you could see the Tigers trending downward, ending up in 4th place, and that only enhances the Tigers' odds of getting a high draft pick in next year's amateur draft, which is really all that Tigers fans and you and I should care about at this juncture for the Detroit Tigers.
How did your brother handle the sweep? Was he bummed out? Was he I know prior to the season, there were really no expectations for the White Sox. I think they're in tank mode fully, and the Tigers went in there and handled their business. How was he? How did he handle the sweep?
You know what? We didn't talk to each other. He watched the games by himself in the basement on the big screen downstairs, and I watched the games upstairs in my room on the little TV. So we didn't really conflict with each other. No conflicts arose. And we did all right, actually, this past weekend after his White Sox got destroyed, realistically, all 3 games by the Tigers.
Okay, after our interview with Dr. Tommy John, I definitely want to get your sense of, the Tigers right now maybe are in playoff contention.
They are technically because of the division being so darn weak.
And so with that, does that necessarily mean that Al Avila's plans might have to change? They might have to be reevaluated in that I know a lot of people want to sell off a bunch of their assets. They can still sell, but maybe at the end of the season. And I might throw out a theory to you that I talked to Jason about. Maybe the Tigers have already rebuilt, and maybe by trading away just one player, then maybe you could add an asset in the bullpen or one everyday player that you can bring in here and maybe make a run at the playoffs and not necessarily sell during this year. Because when you sell at the deadline, people might not offer you the right amount for guys like Nick Castellanos, for guys like Shane Greene, for a Jose Iglesias. You might not get value just by waiting until the end of the year. And I'll even put this thought in your head. Maybe the Tigers have already rebuilt, and maybe it's time to maybe say, this is a team that if you stick with and add a couple pieces around in a year or two, could maybe make the postseason in a weak Central Division. We'll talk about all of that and Dr. Tommy John next on this edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company.
And Doc, one of our fine partners at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, as usual, is the Detroit Sports Commission, who I love calling the DSC. And the Detroit Sports Commission, Doc, as you know, everybody should know by now, has been bringing marquee, and I mean hugely marquee events to the Metro Detroit area, specifically national and international amateur sporting events since 2001. Over a decade, almost 20 years now, 2 decades worth of bringing great marquee events to the Metro Detroit area. And you can follow the Detroit Sports Commission and find out about all the marquee events they are bringing to our very region by following the DSC on Twitter and on Instagram at DET Sports. And make sure to check out their very, very fine website at DetroitSports.org. And it's Dr. Tommy John joining us on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company via Vito's VIP line. He is the son of former Major League left-hander Tommy John, who won 288 games in his 26-year big league career. Dr. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys?
Very good. Glad to have you on. A pleasure of ours. And before we get into your book that just came out in early June, Minimize Injury, Maximize Performance, got to ask you about the Tommy John surgery. And it's a surgery used to repair torn ulnar collateral ligaments in the elbow. And now it's been referred to since 1974 when your father had the surgery, the then experimental procedure. It's been referred to since as the Tommy John surgery. So what has it been like for you and your family since then to have that surgery associated with your father?
Well, we're very proud of what he did and what he was faced against back in he was 31 years old and already pitched 12 seasons successfully. And then the odds were so against him and just the psychology and the emotions behind it for him to take the chance and actually figure out how to come back to pitch another 14 seasons and never miss a start because of his elbow in that time is just phenomenal. And now what it's done for professionals and big leaguers is pretty amazing for the sport of baseball. But sadly, the surgery was birthed to help, a professional extend his career so he could provide for himself, for his family, pursuing a dream. But now the majority of them are happening in kids. And we are kind of sick that now the name's attached to a surgery that's happening more in kids than it is in professionals.
So you're looking at minimize injuries now in the youth and youth athletes. And you came out with this book, Minimize Injury, Maximize Performance. And what led you to come out with this book officially? Could you elaborate upon that, Dr. John?
Sure. So over 17 years of being in rehab and performance, and I was even doing baseball lessons at the time as well. I did over 11,000 baseball skill lessons, and I started to see a trend, and there were degenerative overuse injuries that I was working with people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it was bleeding into the 10, 11, 12-year-olds in all sports. And so everybody is aware. You can't Google sports specialization, youth sports injuries without seeing a number of studies and books, and everyone's talking about it. But there's, at the end of every article, everyone is left with, okay, now what do we do? And I provided the what. Here it is. Here's an actual manual for you to follow and put all these components together in the privacy of your homes, because that's where the secret's going to lie to this whole deal, is with your families and your lifestyles to prevent. Are all injuries preventable? No, that doesn't we can't say that, but the epidemic proportions of these injuries are absolutely preventable.
And now, Dr. John, you've come up with a holistic approach to preventing injuries in these young athletes, such as less long-distance running and Advil and icing injuries only in specific circumstances. How did you end up coming up with these methods, which I guess can be referred to as controversial a little bit because I know other specialists in the medical field have not preached these same practices and methodologies?
Absolutely. So again, over the course of 17 years, I had personally just experimented on myself, on my clients, researched, continuing education, following up with the current models. And I was just testing everything that we were currently doing and just what could we do differently or seeing a way to get an edge. And as I came across these, we were just not doing things as efficient as we could. And let's just take the icing component. The doctor who actually came up with the rest ice compression elevation, the RICE protocol, is Dr. Merkin. And in the 70s, he had since followed up with research 2014, and he said he was wrong. After 15 minutes of traumatic injury, you don't want to ice. It delays healing. It lessens inflammation. It delays blood flow. That's something we don't want. And so it's just very interesting that the guy that came up with it said that we could do something better with movements. And so I, not wanting to take anybody's word for anything, I had to test it. And when I would put it into my clients or myself, the results were not even comparable. And so that's where I could go. If I could apply this or allow this to happen for everybody. Now, I will say this, 15 years ago, when I was first coming across this information to try to deliver to some people, it was met with some pushback. But now you can kind of go into more mainstream research and find some of the things I'm talking about. It's not as hard, but it is a little more challenging. But that's the first thing I say with people coming in who are injured or chronically have stuff going on. How's the things you've been doing working? Are they working? And usually they're like, no. Okay, then great. What have we got to lose to try this other way? And I get them to admit that on the first start.
Now, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are regarding travel baseball. A lot of families put their kids in travel baseball. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Many people are playing year-round. And so for youth, it is important to pay attention to how many games you're playing, especially pitchers, how many times you're going out there. What are your thoughts on travel baseball, and what do you think are efficient ways, and how many months should kids be playing throughout the course of a calendar year?
So when you said the term kids, that's key. No kid should be playing specializing in sport more than 8 months of their year, meaning competing in skill development in more than 8 months. So if we take baseball only, baseball is a spring-summer sport. And you're playing on one team. When that team is done, if you're good enough to play on an all-star team and that team's done, okay, now you're done. There's no more baseball to, one, allow the body to heal, but two, everything we do in baseball is based on these general physical prepared developmental model that kids should just be getting from free play, exploring other sports, developing as children do. But now what we're doing is, because the business is so strong and they're targeting the fear of missing out on the parents and well-intended parents, and they're attacking that mode, we've got this way of where we're trying to breed these elite youth. And that's exactly what they're getting. They're getting a couple of them becoming really elite really early, but then they're dysfunctional teens and dysfunctional adults, and they can't handle it. So the way the model's set up is the fruits of our labor should be well later in our teens. But what we're seeing is everyone's just peaking at 12, 13, and then they can't sustain, and there's burnout and injuries.
And then these kids get burnt out. You're right. I mean, they're doing this year-round, traveling. They're not developing multiple muscles then as well. So it curtails their development. And like the NFL draft that just happened, 29 of the 32 first-round picks were multi-sport athletes. So these kids that are specializing in one sport early on, they're not getting a ton out of it. I guess there are, the rare breeds, the few select elite athletes that do develop because of maybe focusing and specializing in one sport. But it's not common. Like you were saying, it's not consistently from kid to kid or uniform enough to say, wow, this practice should be followed by every single young athlete out there.
Exactly. And now it's the number one risk factor in whether a youth athlete gets injured or not is specialization. It's number one now. So if you, one, don't want your kid to get injured, don't specialize. That's one. Two, the ones to go at the point where you said, there are the rare 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever that get through and benefited from it. Some are saying, and I would agree, that they're not really benefiting. They just survived the way the system's set up, but they could have blossomed even more if we had it and it was appropriate to the way an athlete is truly developed from the ground up to peak when their body is ready to peak. And so they're just surviving the American model. They're not thriving in it, sadly.
And speaking of development, how about pitchers now specifically like your father, developing as time goes on and throwing more than a fastball? Because you see these kids now who are even under 14 who are throwing a changeup, a slider, a curveball, off-speed pitches. And I think it's out there too and been proven that can damage your arm early on. So what is your stance on these young kids and when they should start throwing other pitches, pitches other than a fastball?
If we think about it as a pyramid, and there's 3 sections to the pyramid, with the top part of the pyramid being game pitches, game style pitches. The bottom, most broad part is just having a catch. It's the general action of throwing. Well, that's so broad, and it should be the biggest, largest foundation of every thrower we've got in baseball. That's in softball. That's what it should be. We should have play catch. The middle portion is kind of when you throw a football or you throw a weighted ball maybe, or you do a long toss. You do some sort of different type of style of throwing to accentuate that broad base that you already have locked in, and I mean owned. And then the tippy top portion is my fastballs and games, a new pitch called a curveball or a changeup. So when the person develops that pyramid, and only from the ground up, you can't come from the top down, the pitches will express. You'll be able to handle a curveball, a changeup. But that process takes time.
Yeah.
And so there's even big leaguers now that can't have a catch. And John Smoltz said that the other day. It's like we had 2 bullpens a week where we throw 60%, just owning the outside corner, owning pitches. Now it's 40 pitch bullpens once a week, and everything's just burned out, and we can't sustain because we don't have that bottom foundation locked in for the skill set of really just having a catch.
Now, I became aware of this issue a couple years back when HBO's Real Sports did a feature on the way that pitchers are being taught to throw the ball, and there have been others that have advocated for different ways of delivering the baseball that can maybe even limit the tension on the arm and things like that. What is your stance on the way that pitchers are being taught, because of the fact that, it seems like the going notion right now is, look, the Tommy John surgery can get you where you need to go quickly, within a year of time. And so they go, you know what, we might be willing to burn out a guy. They just get the surgery, maybe even 2 and 3 surgeries to get back, when we should be maybe even looking at alternate ways of teaching pitchers to deliver the baseball.
And that's the sad part, is that the surgery is like the bailout. It's used as we've still got this surgery. Now, mind you, you don't want it. Like you don't want a surgery of any kind. It's an absolute only when we need it. But again, the way we are kind of grooming these pitchers is to go hard, harder, hardest, wherever it goes. Location and change of speed and movement are gone. And I believe there is a way, again, how to develop a thrower to be able to sustain at that high level of burning, at that high level of performance. But the workload and the time, they wouldn't want it. They would have to totally remodel. They would have had to have started when they were 8 years old. By the time they get to the big leagues, it's too late. Unless you pulled every big league pitcher out for a year to 3 years and they didn't compete, and you remodeled them from the ground up, and I mean everybody, and then dumped them back in, could we sustain at the level we're going at now? That's not going to happen. So if we're going to change that and continue the way we're going, you have to start young. Now, if you think about the mechanics of it, being that I did lessons and worked in mechanics, I had some guys with really good motions, and they would get injured all the time. And then there were people with awful motions, and they would never get injured. So I was like, there's something higher than mechanics. And again, if you think about it as a pyramid, the mechanics are at that tip-top portion. A majority of the problems are going to occur in that bottom section.
So your dad threw 125 pitches in a start in the final month of his big league career at age 45, which That's just crazy to me. And that, speaking of that, wanted to transition into the topic of these pitchers and early on in their big league careers getting babied and having pitch counts and only being allowed to maybe throw 80 to 90 pitches in a start. What is your stance on that? And is that maybe curtailing the development of these guys at the big league level as well?
Right. So being that it's agent ball and the agents are kind of controlling the workloads of the pitchers and we're trying to drag this out, we're going to have that problem. And that is it. When the injuries started to occur, we lowered the bar. So now they weren't as prepared for the bar that was set before. Now you just lowered it. Well, now they're going to do even less. So now, because there is an element of exposing yourself to gain strength, nothing just comes without pushback. Getting outside, getting sick is actually part of building your immune system. Like, that's part of it. So throwing is part of the deal, but we don't have the capacity to prepare. We haven't prepared to practice as much as we're going to. So now we can't even perform in a game because our preparation is so low that the solution isn't just start throwing. They would, again, have to totally remodel themselves. Now, my dad, 125 pitches, some of his bullpens would be over an hour long, and he threw for time because if he was feeling real good, he'd throw more. If he didn't, he'd throw less, but in that time. And some people are like, well, he didn't throw that hard. But to him, it was hard. So it's relative effort. And I can remember where I went to Furman and I was playing middle infield and pitch at the Division I level. We had a doubleheader on Saturday. I'd play second base on the first 7-inning game Saturday, start pitching the second game with dirt and eye black on as the starting pitcher at the Division I level. So things have completely changed. And part of it is the fact that we've kind of coddled and trying to control the environment for these athletes to stay in, which is basically like trying to change the weather to prevent frostbite instead of putting on a coat and gloves on the guys or on the girls.
Playing on the middle infield and then pitching in the second game of a doubleheader. My God, that had to be a heck of a grind there for yourself. And you brought up your dad really quickly. How about playing catch with him? I played catch with my pops growing up, with my brother as well. It was great. But you had a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher to throw with, to play catch with growing up. What was that like for you?
Man, and I just got goosebumps actually. You said that. So my parents did it right. I couldn't have catch with him enough, but he wouldn't. I would push because I was one of those ones that was self-driven. I was one of the ones. Dad, can we have a catch? Maybe a little later. Not because he didn't want to spend time with me, because it was too much. So he had to pull on the reins. But I'll tell you something. Some of the highlights of my youth were when I got to go work out. He'd call it workout. You want to go work out with me today? That meant that we got to go into Yankee Stadium. You had to go early before all the players got there. We'd go in the outfield because you couldn't mess up the infield. And we'd play pepper for like an hour. And I was like 10 or 11. We'd throw, hit fly balls, usually with a tennis racket and tennis balls because they're easier to control. And we'd stay out there and then come back in, and you'd get bazooka gum, and you'd be in the tunnels of Yankee Stadium. And it was Randolph and Mattingly and Winfield and Righetti and all these guys that, again, were my dad's teammates. They were very nice to me, so I considered them friends. But I didn't look at it as I'm in Yankee Stadium. I'm with these players that are superior athletes and pick their brains. They were just guys who were really nice to me, and that was just a place that I went and had catch with my dad. But now I look back on it, I'm like, it brings me, it gets me emotionally, because it's something I absolutely was very fortunate to have experienced.
We've had the privilege of talking to Dr. Tommy John. He has a book out called Minimize Injury, Maximize Performance. Where can our listeners get the book, and how can they get in contact with you if they further want to hear your thoughts and theories? Where can they find you on social media, website? Where can they purchase the book?
Sure. So it's available on Amazon. It's on a Kindle version as well. It's at Barnes & Noble. And if you go to my website, drtommyjohn.com, drtommyjohn.com, that's a place to find all my social network connections. But if you want to go on Instagram, it's Dr. Tommy John DC, and then Twitter is Dr. Tommy John DC as well, and on Facebook as well. So look forward to hearing from everybody.
Dr. John, I still hope your dad gets into the Hall of Fame one day. I think he deserves it. It's been a long time coming, I think.
Go.
I don't want to go there with you, but man, God, he has the credentials for it too, doesn't he?
Well, I think so. And I'm biased, but even if I wasn't, but I agree. And I appreciate that.
No problem. With that being said, Dr. Tommy John, thanks for all the insight and time. Great stuff from you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, guys, for helping in the mission.
And back here on Tiger Talk with Chirco and Company, and that was Dr. Tommy John III. Great stuff from him. A lot of stories. He got emotional there. I asked him a question about playing catch with his pops, Tommy John himself, at Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, and he brought up how he would see Don Mattingly, Willie Randolph, former Yankee greats, guys that play in like the alumni Yankees game, old timers Yankees game almost every single year. I think Willie Randolph just played in the most recent one that just happened. So great stories from Dr. Tommy John, and make sure to check out his book, which we tweeted out about at Detroit Podcast, and the book title is Minimize Injury, Maximize Performance.
Really solid interview, great energy, great book. You can check it out at Detroit Podcast. Click the link there, and it helps us out as well. Click through the Amazon banner when you go shopping through DetroitSportsPodcast.com. Yeah, a lot of insight regarding pitching, specializing, the motion, and the notion is that, yeah, people do use the surgery as a bailout, and it's not right. A lot of pitchers that have gone through that surgery have come back and have struggled as well. But a pitcher that now is going to have the surgery, Ohtani, we're going to wait and see if he's going to actually come back and continue to pitch, and it'll be interesting to see. But now back to the Detroit Tigers. Man, Vito, it's one of those things where I said to you prior to talking to Dr. Tommy John, I said, look, the notion is everybody wants the Tigers to rebuild. And when everybody kind of conceptualizes it and talks about the Tigers, they say, well, they're not done yet. They need to kind of start from scratch, let a lot of people go and get to championship level. So that's where the final product will be, is when you have a roster of 25 guys that can compete for a World Series. But now a wrench has been thrown into the recipe in that the division is there for the taking. You're only 2.5 games out. It's in the middle of June. So when you say rebuilding for what? To get into the tournament, to get into the dance, right? And when you have a chance to do it, I feel like a little bit icky just throwing away that opportunity by selling at the deadline. What if, look, you got an opportunity right now, and this notion may be crazy, but the thought runs in my mind, so I feel free to share it. What if, you got one of the plethora of pitchers there? You got Mannings, Burrows, Mize, Faedo. You got a bunch of pitchers, even from trades in the minor leagues.
Franklin Perez as well, who's been hurt, but yeah, another prominent name.
Exactly. You got Michael Fulmer. Let's just say you trade one person from the minors, and you go out there and get maybe a reliever, and you get a bullpen arm, a left-handed bullpen arm, and one everyday player. Maybe you even combine one of those players with a 2-for-2 deal. Jose Iglesias and one of those
a prospect
arm for players that can play right now. Maybe a number 2 or 3 on a team that is obviously selling. Then you say, you know what? You take that chance and you go forward and get into that postseason if you can do it. And then maybe, just maybe, why not the Detroit Tigers have success, win a round, and maybe get to that wild card and maybe be that Cinderella story right now? Now, do they have enough? No. But do you think with the addition of one more reliable bullpen arm with Jimenez, Greene, because when you get to the postseason, everything kind of shrinks down when you get into a 9-inning game and best-of-5 series. Maybe you get the opportunity to advance and maybe strike lightning, because remember, we went into the postseason with the best rotation in baseball, and it didn't work out. The Giants have done it. Maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, and just maybe, if you get into the postseason with this kind of roster that's just gung-ho and playing for each other, maybe Hicks is an unsung hero across the landscape of Major League Baseball. Maybe Nick Castellanos, is able to have some heroics in the postseason. Maybe you win out a couple 4-2 grind-them-out games. The answer that fans give back to us, which is fair, is that Gardenhire hasn't had that great success in the postseason, so we are still at square one of a rebuild, and maybe 6 players of the roster right now can be part of that team. I'm saying maybe the entire roster in 2018 can be part of a special season if you just add a couple pieces. Not saying full-on buy, not saying full-on sell, but maybe not completely blow this thing up in July.
How was the ganja that you smoked?
Still don't
this
believe
morning?
It, huh? You don't believe it, huh? You don't think
crack
that
is whack.
You don't
Remember that
believe...
Whitney Houston once famously said it. So
why
you've
not,
done
Vito?
crack.
Why is it
recently.
crazy?
Crack is whack.
Why is crazy?
And you're whack for saying what you just said about the Tigers because of the fact that the Tigers are in the initial part of the rebuilding process, a long-term rebuild that will take 3 to 4 years in length. So you can't jumpstart now this rebuild almost out of nowhere. Now I know because of the fact that we have a 500 team that's close to the first place Cleveland Indians at this point in the season, still almost 80 games through the season, meaning halfway through the season almost at this point. So people are jumping to conclusions and saying, oh, we've expedited the process. We have to start winning now big time and deal guys for guys that can help us right now at the big league level. Guess what? They're still a ways away. They're only in this divisional race because of the fact that the Indians have stunk up the joint as well and have way underperformed. If they would have up to this point met their expectations or exceeded expectations, which they still could at this point as the season progresses. Well, if they do end up doing that as the season does progress here, they're going to take off and run away with the division. I still believe that strongly. Now, the Indians haven't done that up to this juncture in the campaign, but could they do that? Are they capable of doing that? Yes. I say hell yeah. And that's why I think the Tigers are still a ways away from competing for a division crown seriously. Now, you can jump to conclusions and not take your crazy pills and believe the Tigers have a shot right now. But guess what? You're smoking some good ganja. You've got to start taking your crazy pills and a variety of other things you have to do or should stop doing because this team, get your foot off the gas pedal. And let's go back to the before the season expectations of this Tigers team being about a third-place team. Good enough to finish in third, but definitely not a second-place caliber squad or even close to a first-place caliber squad.
Okay, so you're saying, John, that thought is crazy. By the end of the year, they're going to shake out to be an under 500 team. It's not worth the risk of trading off any of the prospects for even an attempt at going far in the postseason. But
well, they're not going to go anywhere in the postseason, so they may get in, and then they get ousted in the first round, get swept in 3 games or something, in a best-of-5 series to open up the playoffs. I mean, what do you expect? So, I mean, these fans that are crazy out there that are saying, hey, let's go for it now. We're only 500. Let's go for it all of a sudden. So if you go for it, you make a trade, let's say you get into the postseason, you win the division. Guess what? You get ousted in the first round by the Red Sox, the Yankees, by every other team in the playoffs. So what's the point of going for that? We've already been down that route before, and we've lost in the first round. We've lost in the ALCS. Why are we going to do that now? It'd be totally crazy.
It does sound like a shot in the dark, but it is kind of the reverse notion where we've gone in with all the talent, and maybe, just maybe, this team in the postseason.
The team that stinks, we're going to win it all. Like, really? People are thinking that now? We've had great teams that couldn't win it. You think this team's going to win it? You got to be kidding me.
Wouldn't that be something?
Oh, yeah. I don't even know where I'd be. There'd be a lot of people on stuff if they won it because I wouldn't even be able to deal with that. This team winning it, I would have to drink a lot, smoke for the first time. Good ganja. I don't know, man.
That's the point. I think that's where the fan in me comes out and says, I would be more excited if this team won it than a team that was rebuilt. I mean, a team of unsung heroes.
It'll be exciting way down the way. Like 3-4 years from now, that'll be exciting because you kind of live and learn with this team. You build with the team, you follow them from day one, and then you can win with the team that you followed from day one. That's more exciting. That's where the excitement is at, man.
Real quickly, just a side note.
Yes.
I'm on LinkedIn, the Detroit Sports Podcast.
Uh-huh.
So guess who followed us?
Who did?
Just out of the blue right now, a sweet sales accountant for the Detroit Tigers followed us.
Really?
She's going to be hitting us up.
All of a sudden, hit us up, please, for offers and deals, right?
No, they're going to hit us up for getting a suite. They're going to be like, oh, you guys are a network? Oh, you guys want a suite?
Contact us.
You know
John would love to pay a lot of money, man.
You know how much they are?
Well, they know you're loaded, too.
$200K plus.
You're capable? You got that money, right? Come on, you were showing me all those $100 bills, all those Benjamins earlier before this podcast recording, man.
I love this podcast. The way the podcast is right now, we're getting follows left and right.
We're thriving, though, man. We're thriving. We're doing well, and the Tigers are thriving, kind of. Playing the Reds now for 2 on the road in Cincy, starting tonight, the night of this recording, and they play Wednesday at 12:35. An early start time. And guess who's going to be at Great American Ballpark for that game?
Who's that?
Nobody. At 12:35. You're starting at 12:35 on a Wednesday afternoon. I know it's the summer. Kids are out for summer vacation.
Yeah.
Guess who's showing up, though, to that? To see that team. I almost said, that poop show. Well, nobody's going to be showing up for that poop show, man.
Well, we said, and I told you that this team could get to 500 and beyond. Now, they're still not in first place.
And beyond is the key word. Beyond, how far beyond?
Okay, before we get out of here,
yes.
When you saw the series, the Tigers and the Indians, you could see the vast difference in terms of pitching and the success, and I know we talked about it on last week's podcast. If there was something the Tigers could do to bridge the gap between them and the Indians, what could that be? Because when you see the way they play now versus the White Sox and the Royals, they're handling their business. They're doing okay. What could they do to bridge the gap if they were to stick with this roster and go forward and take a step and maybe even overcome the Indians? What would they have to do?
Do a lot of PEDs, cork their bats, do a lot of cheating, steal their players. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
If it happens, okay, so what are we going to do if it happens? Like, what do you want me to do if it happens? I think we've kind of talked about this before. But if they were to win the division.
I feel like if they maybe stuck with the 6-man rotation and
well,
they
that's
were
if
able
Hardy
to.
keeps pitching well. Remember, everybody is banking on that. It's totally
Yes.
predicated upon that principle. Him continuing to pitch effectively and well the rest of the way this season. How great are those odds, though?
Okay.
Come on, man.
Why don't-
well under 50%.
Why don't more teams use a 6-man rotation?
Because their 5 are good enough. And then you can just go to the bullpen. Instead of using 6 starting arms, use your bullpen if it's effective enough. And a lot of teams now build up their bullpens.
Maybe they could use part of the Tampa Bay strategy where you put in Jimenez in the first inning, and then the next game you put Greene in the first inning, and then you throw out Zimmerman for just 3 or 4 innings.
You brought that up about Jay. I remember went after you. I'm going to go after you again because it's so funny. Zimmerman's making how much money, though, for 3 innings? You're paying him all over 3 innings?
Do what you got to do by any means necessary, right?
To win, they don't care about winning that much, though, this year. Now, if they were a competitive ball club, you might consider that more strongly and just forget about the fact that he's making all that money. You still pitch him the 3-4 innings because that's the most effective way of winning consistently as a ball club. This year, they don't care about winning enough to even, I think, try to or think about implementing that great strategic plan of yours there, Doc.
Always enjoy the podcast. Definitely check out Tuesdays with Vito on Periscope and our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. You can follow Vito at Vito Jerome. Definitely every Sunday, Monday, read his work in the Free Press. The article is titled the same thing every week, 5 numbers that you need to know for this week. And it's a great article. Please read up on Vito and read his work. He's a great, really great journalist. He's doing great work with the Free Press and the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Enjoy the interview. Big thanks to Dr. Tommy John. Check out his book. You can click through the Amazon banner at DetroitSportsPodcast.com. Thanks, Vito.
Minimize injury, maximize performance. Adios.